Well, today you're going to hear from a cop's view who really committed the murders of Derek and Nancy Haysom in the mystery that has divided the crime community. On today's program, Charlie Crime Buster, well, we're going to give you our opinion on who really did those brutal murders in Part 4, the Bedford Murders, the house in the woods.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals interviewed and participating in this show, and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster or Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Charlie Crime Buster. We want to thank you for being a part of the Charlie Crime family. This will be our last podcast probably in this year because next Sunday, we'll probably get one more in on New Year's Eve as we usually release these podcasts on the Sunday prior to Monday. So, let me welcome you again to the program. If you're a first-time listener, thank you so much for joining with us. Every week we have new listeners, and it always humbles us, the thousands of downloads that we have seen through the time that Charlie Crimebuster has been broadcasting. Thank you for being a part of the family. Hey, by the way, if you are a first-time listener, go on over there and subscribe to the podcast. If you get a chance, leave us a review, 4-star or 5-star, we hope. That'll help us get the word out to more and more people. So be sure and hit that button where you subscribe so you can get caught up with Charlie and stay caught up with Charlie. Hey, speaking of getting caught up, if you'd like to find other episodes, go to charliecrimebuster.com, charliecrimebuster.com. There you can get caught up with all the other episodes. And if you'd like to support the program, go on over to peacemakernetwork.com. peacemakernetwork.com. There you become a badge, BADGE supporter for as little as $3 a month. And you can not only help support the program, but you help us help the men and women of law enforcement, the military, and the first responders. Always call them the people who run toward danger instead of away from danger. Okay, now that we've got some housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about our focus. I mentioned in Part 3, the Bedford Murders, the house in the woods, that this was a difficult one for sure. There are good experts on both sides of this case. There are those who believe that Elizabeth Haysom, and there are those who believe the second story of Jen Soering. Now, I do respect the opinions of both sides. But today, I promised you I would tell you where I land on the case. We've taken the time in the past cases, and again, if you have not got caught up, go to charliecrimebuster.com and get caught up. We have Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and this is Part 4. So now it's time for me to tell you where I am on the case. Now, in the other places, we've went ahead and taken the time to show you Elizabeth's side. We've taken the time to show you Jen's side, and now it's time for me to tell you where I think it all comes down to. My friend, I believe the jury in the Soering trial got it right. That's right, I believe Jen Soering did indeed stab and kill Derek and Nancy Haysom. Now, we've already established that we cannot come to this conclusion on the words of both of these criminals. Both of them conspired in some ways in the murders. Both of them lied in their testimonies. So that only brings us to one thing. The evidence. Is there evidence that proves that Jen Soering did not do these killings? I believe that such evidence does not prove that he did not do the killings. So let's get to it. Here are some of the reasons why I believe the evidence does not prove that he did not kill the Haysoms. First of all, my friend, there is the DNA. Oh, the DNA. This is very, very important. This is the big one. Now, we're all used to, by now, hearing of people who are getting out of jail, prison, because they were wrongfully convicted. And DNA proves their innocence. Well, there are some people, including John Grisham and others, that believe that this one does as well. But think with me now. There have been plenty of opportunities for the state of Virginia to admit that the DNA proved that Jen Soering did not do the murders. If so, why is it that the state did not move for his innocence through a pardon? Now, there are those who say that the state just does not want to look bad. However, my friend, I believe it's just the opposite. I believe they are looking bad in the eyes of others, including John Grisham and others, because they're not giving a pardon to Soering. So they're already looking bad, so it's not that they will not give him a pardon because they're afraid they'll look bad. The reason they do not give a pardon to Jen Soering is that it is not conclusive DNA proof. For instance, my friend, the quantity of the DNA is extremely small, and therefore the quality is extremely small. It was found years later on the very tips of cotton swabs. In fact, this is what Elder, who actually was involved in testing that DNA, this is what she said in her report. Her report indicated that DNA recovered from the samples was of insufficient quantity to provide enough information to produce an entire DNA profile. It was only a partial DNA profile. Next, we have cross-contamination. Now, according to Soering's confessions, well, the Haysons had even prepared a meal for him, and they prepared that on the kitchen cabinet where some of this DNA was collected. Now, both Miss Hayson and Derek Hayson's DNA was no doubt left there. Now, there was blood there that was type O, and that DNA was not Soering's, but that doesn't mean that the blood wasn't there. Blood and DNA is two different things. Type O blood was there. I believe it was Soering's blood. But the DNA, the partial DNA, was not his DNA. You see, there was all kinds of other DNA around that scene. There was other DNA collected from the door. Of course, not only did Derek Haysom go in and out of the door, no doubt others did as well, including the police officers and other males that were with the person who found the bodies in the first place. There was a lot of cross-contaminated DNA all over this scene. So just to say that because there was a unidentified male DNA left at the scene, that excludes Soering from doing these killings, well, that just does not. Well, in the South, we say that dog doesn't hunt. That dog just does not hunt. Yes, there was a male pattern DNA left at the scene. But the crime scene itself, my friend, was to the place that there would be transferred DNA from the victim. He stabbed Derek Haysom. He stabbed his wife. There was blood all over the place. There was DNA on the knife, and that there was blood all over the place. Some people said this was the worst scene they had ever seen. And just to say, because there was a partial DNA left at the scene, that was not Soering's, does not prove that someone else was there and did the killings. And all the other possible suspects that Soering brought into the picture, those two stragglers that was in the greater area that had done another murder, the so-called made-up drug pusher story by Soering, all of those were tested, and they were ruled out. So, my friend, that leaves us to the most likely male partial DNA left at the scene, and that it was of Derek Haysom himself. No doubt there was transferred DNA all over the place. And I believe that male DNA left at the scene was that of Derek Haysom himself. Not only I believe that, but a lot of scientists believe that. A lot of experts in the field believe that. So the bottom line is simply this. Regardless of what you think about it, DNA in this case, because of the small amount of DNA and the terrible contamination left, not only then, but from hundreds of people handling the evidence. That evidence was placed in the evidence room and anybody could go in and look at it. Reporters could, investigators could, all kinds of people was handling that evidence with no logs on it, no gloves. And all of this basically renders today DNA evidence useless to prove who was there at the scene. So DNA, my friend, does not exonerate Jen Soering from doing these murders. So then, my friend, that brings us to some other evidence to consider. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But right now it is time for us to share with you what we call our crazy crook story. It's our way of kind of lightening the load, if you please, from some of the dark things that we share. Well, our crazy crook story here comes from, it's an interesting one. It actually comes from Dallas, Texas. For most people, prison would be something you escape from and never look back if you ever find yourself in that predicament. But there are some Texas prisoners, some crazy crooks, if you please, that they just need their creature comforts before coming right back. Yep, according to the Dallas News, an inmate who was locked up in the federal facility in Beaumont, Texas, well, he snuck out, only to get booze, tobacco, snacks, and food, and hang on to your hat, bring those back with him, since of course, the food in the prison is probably bad. And it isn't just this one incident. Inmates apparently been using the back door to skip out to land nearby, picking up contraband for some time now. That's according to Sheriff's Deputy Marcus McClellan. He recently told the Beaumont Enterprise that inmates have been essentially making up their own in and out privileges at the facility since day one. Yep, sheriff's deputies, Jefferson County, finally realized what was happening. They laid to wait and watch it all go down. Around 5:40 p.m. this past Wednesday, a duffel bag was dropped off at adjacent property. Around 7:30 p.m., 27-year-old Joshua Randall Hanson was observed leaving the prison to retrieve the bag. And on Hanson's way back into the facility after picking it up, he was arrested. And once they confiscated that duffel bag, it was full of alcohol, whiskey and brandy, specifically. Also packages of tobacco, snacks, fruits, and plenty of home-cooked food. Hanson was already in the process of serving a little over 2 years for conspiring to distribute designer drugs. Now, no doubt, he'll likely do additional time as he faces escape and marijuana possession charges. So this idiot, this crazy crook, who actually escaped prison, but then turned around and came right back into prison with contraband, he indeed is Charlie Crimebuster's crazy crook of the week. Now back to our main focus. We've already talked about the DNA, that it was terribly contaminated. It was a very small sample, so there's no way that we can conclusively say that eliminates our suspect, Jen Soering, from doing the murders. He already confessed that he did. Now he's taking that confession back. So we're going to have to look at the evidence itself. And the bottom line again is that the DNA is so small and is terribly contaminated, so it does not prove that he was not there at the scene. It could have well been Derek's own DNA, the victim's DNA left there. So that brings us to some other evidence to consider. Let's talk about the type O blood that was left at the scene. Jen Soering has type O blood. And you come back, as his people have said, 45% of the population does. That's right. But my friend, 45% of the population did not conspire with Elizabeth to kill her parents. He did. 45% of the population did not say, as he did in his letters, quote, that he already had the dinner scene played out in his head as they were talking about getting rid of her parents. 45% of the population did not refuse to give up his blood and fingerprints. when questioned by the police at the very beginning of this investigation. And 45% of the population did not take off and skip out of country when the police were closing in on them. And 45% of the population did not confess to murdering in cold blood the lives of Derek and Nancy Haysom. So in light of all that, the fact that type O blood was left there is a very big deal. I believe that type O blood did play a part in the evidence, as it was introduced by the prosecutor, who mentioned it some 26 times during the hearing. Now let's talk about this so-called junk science. That's the sock print. Much has been said about the sock print. In fact, the expert witness has been introduced to the public by Soering team as an inexperienced, well, it looks almost like a wacko who came up with something crazy. Nothing could be further from the proof. My friend, in fact, while the expert was not an expert in footprints, he was a distinguished FBI agent. He specialized in tire prints. Prints are prints, my friend, no matter what part of the body left them. He also even had a law degree. And the truth of the testimony was that he did not say that the sock print proved they were Soering's. He simply said he could not rule out that they were Soering's by the sock print. In that light, my friend, it wasn't just mere junk science. In fact, when I saw that overlay over the print, the actual overlay over the sock print, the overlay of Soering's footprint, my friend, I concluded, probably just like the jury did, that it was most likely Soering who left that sock print. In fact, in his own testimony, he said as much. He said he went back into the scene without his shoes on, that he tried to swirl the blood around. So put that in light with the rest of it. Then, my friend, that brings us to the testimony. Now, much is said that the entire confession was not recorded. There was a lot of people that talked about, wow, how could any seasoned investigator not record his confession? It was presented like the prosecutor wanted to hide something or trick people about his confession. But the truth is the entire confession was not recorded because Soering would not agree to it. He was the one who had them turn off the recorder time and time again. They would have loved to record the whole confession, but it was Soering who would not agree for that to happen. He didn't say that, did he, when he talks about his innocence? He also says that he was not allowed an attorney. That, again, was a lie. He lied about that as well. He was provided with an attorney, and at times he chose on his own personal record to speak without one present, even though he had the right to have an attorney. That was another lie of Soering. He also says that, well, we should know that his confession was bogus because he got facts wrong in the confession. Now get this. He was questioned, and he talked for hours on end about these murders. And yet, in all that time, he only got a couple of facts wrong. A couple of facts out of so many correct facts. Any of us would have done the same thing in such a scene as he was in. Imagine that. In fact, when he got the clothes wrong that Nancy was wearing, he said blue jeans when it was a house coat, he even then had to think long about his answer, and he appeared to be very unsure. There's a reason for that. My friend, he had a whole lot of things on his mind that night, including killing 2 people in cold blood. The idea that he got his confession wrong, that it was bogus because he got a couple of little things wrong, well, that just doesn't fly with me. I think, my friend, it's amazing how many things he got right in that confession. He was able to talk about the outlay of the table. He was able to talk about what was on it, who sat where. He was able to talk about the very food that was served. He even mentioned the ice cream. He even added other facts, like hitting a dog on the way out of the scene in the car. My friend, all of this proves to me, in my opinion, that he was telling the truth. He wasn't making up a confession. I've never heard of anybody make up a confession that was so on tune to what happened at that scene. Now next, I want to share with you what has bothered me most about this case. The one thing that was causing me quite a bit of doubt. You see, Elizabeth stated that when she saw Soering after he committed those murders, she said he was in the car wrapped in a sheet and was covered with blood. Yet when the deputy sheriff sprayed the vehicle with luminol, it did not show any blood. That bothered me most about the case. How could that be? How could it be that he was covered in blood and yet luminol did not hit on anything in the car where it was sprayed? Then my review and research covered some other things. First, while I'm sure there was probably some blood left on him, it appears that he cleaned himself up before leaving the scene. He was even so conscientious about getting blood in the car that he wrapped himself up in a sheet and a blanket that he got from the house to keep from getting blood in the car. Next, consider this. That test was not conducted by a trained CSI collector. He was the deputy sheriff. He was a good man, had good intentions, did good things for the county, probably saved lives, but he had not used that process very often. He was just told to go out there to check it. You have to ask yourself, was the ratio mix correct in this? Because if you get that mix wrong, it will give false readings. There have been plenty of times when there's been blood and luminol did not pick it up in other situations. Add to this, my friend, the fact that this vehicle was not tested right away. Lots of time, months and months had passed. The vehicle had been ridded and washed and ridded and washed and ridded and washed many, many times. Even the way the vehicle was tested was not according to standards. They did not take the vehicle and bring it into the crime lab to test it. He only went out there, sprayed a little luminol around the driver's area, and he didn't pick up anything. He didn't even test the entire car. Only a very small portion of the vehicle was tested. It was not completely tested. So the fact that one quick spray with a luminol in only one area did not pick up blood, it does not prove to me, or I think any reasonable person, that he did not drive that vehicle there and back and commit these killings. That was the one that bothered me the most until I found out the facts. Next is the fact of the incriminating letters. Boy, he revealed his place in the crime so obviously. You see, in the letters, first of all, they was concerned that he had left his fingerprints behind. And at that time, he no doubt had thought that they had found fingerprints at the scene. If he was not at the scene, why would it bother him that he may have left his fingerprints behind in the apartment? Why was he trying his best to keep them from getting his fingerprints? Why did he wipe down everything, but he forgot to wipe one thing down? And why did that bother him? It is a consciousness of guilt, my friend. He thought his fingerprints was left at the scene. Then there were the writings from himself, even before the police was on them. There was a time when they were grieving, and she was spending time with her family, with her stepbrothers, her family that was left there. And he, of course, the typical person that he was jealous. And he wrote to her, get this, and this is chilling, right after the murders. Why did I do this for you if you're spending time with your family instead of me? Those were the words pretty well that he used in indicating. He did say, why did I do this for you? Very incriminating indeed. This was before any of this thing where he recanted his testimony. Very incriminating indeed. Why would he say that if he had not done that? Then there was the alibi itself. Keep in mind, my friend, that he only came up with a false confession some 4 years later. He was sticking to his confession. But he had all those years to think, how can I get out of this? How can I get out of this? What kind of story can I put before others that I might be able to get out of this? And then he had the time on top of that after his conviction to continue to go over and over the case to find any little loophole at all that he could probably exploit to try to make himself look good in this position. This was 4 years later that he did this. Why didn't he mention this when he first dumped him? Why? Because he had to have time to come up with a story to save himself from conviction of the murders. You see, he now claims that he stayed behind and Elizabeth went to do the killings. If that was the truth, why did he frame the alibi to save himself instead of her? You see, he didn't think this through. If he was trying to put an alibi together to cover her, why did he sign his name to the room service bill instead of her name? See, she signed his name. Why? Because she was building the alibi for Jens, not herself. You see, it doesn't make sense in this story in the first place that he was making an alibi because Elizabeth, quote, according to him, was making a drug run for her drug dealer. First of all, it was never proven there was a drug dealer at all in this story. These were kids who were doing drugs. This wasn't some cartel that was running drugs all over the place, that was blackmailing people to do drug runs. Yet drug runs was a sensational part of the story that Jens was trying to get out there, that people would grab onto to get himself off the hook. You see, Jens Soering, it is altogether more believable that what Elizabeth said on the stand is true. She said she was more concerned that he would not be able to do the killings than that he would do the killings. Yes, my friend, it was a crime that they had planned when they wrote about it. Just doing away with their parents, not having to wait for them to get their hands on the inheritance. The only problem was this couple got caught. They didn't think about the mileage on their rental car when they were putting that rental car into the entire story that they had just gone to Washington for a weekend to give them that alibi. They didn't think about the miles, that the police would check the miles, and yet the police did check the miles. And then when it caught the attention of the police and they knew the police were on them, they took off to another country to avoid apprehension and arrest. Both were guilty of conspiring to kill. But in my opinion, it was Jens that did the killing. And my friend, he deserved every year that he spent behind bars. They each got what they deserved. In fact, they each got off early for what they did. They took not just one life, but 2 lives in premeditated murder. So, my friend, that wraps it up for me. Now, I will say I admire those who feel differently about the case, but I think, my friend, the evidence does not prove that Jens Soering did not do these murders. The state of Virginia was correct in not offering a pardon to Jens Soering. So, my friend, there it is for me. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to write. It's a safe spot. You can disagree. Give me a shout out. You can reach me at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. We'll have that in the show notes for you as well. So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster here saying, stay safe, stay alert. Yep, for the life you save, it may be your very own.